Hey, I'm Bill, the accidental physicist,
And I'm Amy, the incidental psychologist.
and once again, it's Tuesday after lunch. So last time we talked about a kind of miracle, how errors in complex systems cancel each other out. You've got imprecision deliberately stacked on imprecision to make sure the answer comes out clean, especially in the old amplifiers from the 70s. Boy, I miss those amplifiers. I miss everything about the 70s, but it won't come back. We called it destructive interference of imprecisions. That's something I borrowed kind of from physics.
Which was a great idea. And I love it so much that I went back telling people about it for weeks. My mother-in-law, strangers at coffee shops, even my colleagues at work.
You're welcome. Today, we want to talk about when that doesn't happen, when the imprecision isn't meeting other imprecision in the middle somewhere. It's aimed directly at your face, specifically on the internet.
So we're talking about the opposite of a miracle.
Pretty much, but there's a UNIX rule for it.
So let's walk through the distinction. Because last time we were talking about imprecision in systems, measurement error, modeling, assumptions, rounding, that sort of thing. And today, imprecision from people is what we're going to talk about.
Right. And there's a specific flavor I want to talk about. It's not someone who knows you well and they're making a careful wrong argument. That's a different problem. That's a Thursday conversation. I'm talking about the kind of thing that happens on social media where someone, or maybe a lot of someone's, with maybe evil intent, takes a shot at you that is vague enough to be unfalsifiable and emotionally charged enough to spread, aka rage bait, and they confidently deliver it in a way that feels precise without actually being precise.
Do you mean the pile-on?
Yeah, the pylon, or even just a single comment that lands weird. You only care about X. You just don't understand why. This is exactly what's wrong with Z. It sounds like a specific accusation, but it doesn't actually contain one. It's like getting hit by a cloud. You can feel it, but you can't grab onto it.
And the vagueness is doing the work here, because if I say you're wrong about the capital of France, you can just say it's Paris. Goodbye. Here, have a croissant. But if I say you clearly don't appreciate the full cultural ambiguity of European geopolitics,
now you've given me a year's worth of homework to disprove something that wasn't really a claim in the first place. It's Kafka, but with a comment section.
So in this case, the imprecision is a feature, not a bug.
And I say that as someone who deeply respects bugs. Well, anyway, this is what the internet figured out, whether intentionally or by accident. I'm going to assume by accident. Vague accusations are aerodynamic. Precise ones aren't. In physics terms, a vague accusation has almost no drag coefficient. It just sails.
So is it like the more detail you claim, the more handholds you've given someone to climb up and then argue with you?
If you say that policy will increase unemployment by 4%, and you've handed someone a target, if you say that policy is heartless and you can keep running forever, nobody's got receipts on heartlessness. You can't pull up a spreadsheet and go, actually, here's the hard data.
And in this case, the algorithm isn't for precision then. It's sorting for engagement. Outreach, travels, Jesus takes the wheel.
So
what
you end
else?
up in this environment where the directed imprecision isn't just coming from bad faith actors, it's the medium itself selecting for it. The platform amplifies vague charged language because vague charged language gets clicks. I'll give you an example in terms of Jesus takes the wheel. There's a joke that went around in the 80s where people are talking about a basketball game, and Jesus gets the ball, and Jesus passes to Moses, and Moses passes to Elijah, and Elijah shoots, but he misses, but Jesus saves. That was outrage. That was clickbait, right? Because you've taken this common religious phrase that a lot of people use, and you've made it trivial. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about vague language. It's an ecology. And you're trying to survive in it with what? A well-reasoned paragraph? Not going to happen.
Which is when most people make mistakes.
Yes, which is when most people make the mistake.
The mistake. So what is the mistake?
The mistake is thinking you can solve an imprecise attack with a precise response. You write the thread, you explain the full context, maybe you put the math in there, you address each sub-accusation individually, you bring receipts, footnotes, and possibly a bibliography.
And you're losing the whole time then.
Yeah, you were losing before you started. Because here's the thing, when you respond with complexity, you're implicitly accepting the frame that complexity is owed. that the accusation was serious enough to deserve a serious answer, that it was serious enough to even deserve an answer. And you've just spent your energy demonstrating that. You've essentially written a college essay to respond to someone who threw a paper airplane at your head.
While everybody else just reads the first post and then moves on.
The accusation needed 5 seconds to make. Your refutation needed 3 hours to write, and most of the audience saw the accusation, not the refutation. And even the ones who saw both got the ratio right.
And there's another problem too. The refutation generates surface area.
Boy, does it. Every clarification is a new target. You explain one thing, and now there's a thing you just said that needs explaining. You've opened new fronts. You've actually helped them refute your argument.
Now, here's what makes this whole thing even worse. Even if you do respond perfectly, even if you win in every single point in some imaginary debate scoreboard, the damage is already done because of how our brains are wired.
Go on.
So there's this concept in psychology called the negativity bias, sometimes called the psychology of bad. So Roy Baumeister and his colleagues wrote this famous paper, literally titled Bad is Stronger Than Good, and you might have heard of it. And the finding is pretty brutal. Negative events, negative information, negative impressions, they carry more weight than positive ones. Not a little more, but a lot more.
So someone says 10 nice things about you, and somewhere in there is one terrible thing.
You remember that terrible thing, and you dream about that terrible thing. The 10 nice things are just wallpapers. That thing is a stain on a wallpaper that you can see from space or even from a helicopter down. Baumeister also found that it takes roughly about 5 positive interactions to offset one negative one. During the beginning of my managerial training at Canonical, one of my manager taught me that when you give feedback to your reports, if it's a bad one, try to say at least 5 good things to them before you start breaking bad news to them. But if you think about it, 5 to 1, that's not a fair exchange rate.
No, that's an awful exchange rate. That's like payday loan level interest on negativity.
And it makes evolutionary sense, right? If you're a prehistoric human, the cost of ignoring a threat is death. The cost of ignoring a compliment is maybe you feel slightly less warm and fuzzy, but your brain learned to prioritize the bad because the bad can kill you. And the good was just a nice to have.
So when someone launches a vague, imprecise attack at you online, even if 100 people are saying, you're a great guy, the architecture of your brain is going to spotlight that attack. So you're telling me it's not a character flaw, it's actually firmware.
It's a firmware, which means the real asymmetry isn't just the internet, it's us. One mean comment outperforms 100 kind ones, and because our brains have this dictated threat detector that was designed for lions and new processes, tweets.
So keep it simple isn't just communication strategy, it's neuroscience strategy. Every additional word you attach is another surface where negativity can creep in.
That's an interesting one. Let's talk about this famous UNIX rule. Keep it simple.
Well, Unix just figured this out in the 70s, probably the 60s, and it had nothing to do with social media, obviously, but the principle applies so cleanly, it's almost funny. The rule is, keep it simple, not as a style preference, as a design philosophy. I think the statement of the original rule that Ken Thompson spouted was, keep it simple because it's cheaper and easier to carry around, which is true. The right program does one thing and it does it well. It doesn't anticipate every possible input. It doesn't grow to handle edge cases until it collapses. It doesn't write a 12-part thread about why it's actually a good program.
So how does that work?
You say one thing, one clear, true thing about your actual position. Then you stop. This is what's good about assertive discipline, which is what I use with my kids. When you say to somebody, stop that, you're an idiot, that's not actually simple, clear communication. When you say to your child, when you act like that in the store, it embarrasses me and I can't focus on shopping and it takes us longer. That's the absolute truth. Now, see, there's no positivity or negativity in that statement at all. It's just because it's all about this is how it makes me feel. You're not saying something negative about the person. You're telling them how their behavior affects you. And that's why assertive discipline really works.
So
It works not because you're giving up, but because you don't have to say more. Adding more is just complexity to a situation. That complexity won't help. And some of that complexity is statements about the person, which distract them from what you're trying to tell them. So if you just tell them the facts and your feelings about the facts, you've now established a baseline that they can't attack. They're only going to hear what you're telling them about how you feel about what just happened.
So that means you can't win. It's a kind of judo. You use your opponent's momentum against them and not by giving them something to push against.
Well, yeah, it's probably close to judo. You don't add weight. You don't give them something to push against. In physics, we'd say you're reducing your cross section. A big, complicated response is a barn door. A simple, clear one is either a needle or it's just a blank wall. Same incoming fire, but radically different hit probability.
There's something I want to push on because I think there's a real distinction between directed imprecision and just someone making a somewhat imprecise argument that they actually care about. And I think those require different responses.
That's the whole skill, isn't it? You got to be able to read which one you're dealing with. And it's not always obvious. Sometimes a genuine question is wearing the same outfit as the attack.
So, how do you tell?
Well, for me, there's a few signals. One is whether precision is available to them. And that's important. If someone knows enough about your actual work to make a specific argument and they didn't, that's a choice. If they couldn't have made a specific argument because they don't know your work or they don't know the subject or they don't know what you're talking about, the imprecision is structural, not strategic, and you deal with it differently.
What about the second one?
Well, whether they seem interested in resolution. The person who's actually trying to figure something out will engage with what you say. They'll listen, they'll update, or as my wife does, when I say something like that and I explain it, she says, right. And that means she understood it in her terms and she knows what I'm saying now. But they'll update it, they'll push back. The pile-on doesn't update. It just finds a new angle. It's like a flooding river. It doesn't care about your argument. It just flows around the obstacles and keeps going.
So, I guess the third one probably is volume. One person making, let's say, a poorly worded but genuine point is a conversation. But 50 people making the same poorly worded point simultaneously, that's a weather event. You don't argue with the weather.
Yeah, you don't argue with whether you put on a coat or go inside or make some tea or read a book or let the storm be the storm. But an important thing to understand about people who don't know what you're talking about and are arguing, the thing that you have to be responsible for is the fact that they may be frustrated because you're talking over their head, which is now on you. So now they're not making this terrible argument because they're angry or they're rage baiting or they just want to win. They're making this terrible argument because you're putting them on unequal ground. And that's when you need to stop and explain what you're trying to say. That will heal those. So that middle weather path is one that you have to handle as if it were your mistake, because everybody makes those mistakes too.
So, practically, what does a simple response look like? Because I think people keep hearing, keep it simple. And I think it means say nothing or maybe just ignore them.
No, it's not nothing. Nothing reads as a concession or guilt. Simple is one sentence or two, your actual position, not a defense of yourself, just a clear statement of where you actually stand, and then you're done. There's a scene from Star Trek, I'm going to bring Star Trek in, of course, where Mr. Spock says to an enemy, I understand your position. And the enemy says, I'm glad you agree, Mr. Spock. He said, I did not say I agree. I simply said I understand.
And I guess that links back to how your wife also responds to you as right, period. That means it's like she didn't respond to responses.
No, correct. You don't respond to responses. That's the hard part. That's where the instinct to keep building complexity bites you. The thread is already live. You already said the thing. Anything you add now is just more surface area, more material for the negativity bias to work with, and you keep sticking your feet in the quicksand.
Say that the younger me would have said that it feels like losing to stop.
It feels like losing. You can't pretend otherwise, especially if you know you're right, especially if you could win the argument in a fair fight. But you're not in a fair fight, and the score isn't being kept the way you think it is. That's the deal. If the other boxer has a horseshoe in his glove, there's no point in punching like crazy. You're not going to win.
Now, this is where this gets really interesting because there's a reason I think it feels like losing. It's not just ego in the colloquial sense. It's actually ego in the Freudian sense. And this is where psychology gets kind of delicious.
I'm listening and slightly afraid. There's no math for this.
So Freud's model, and look, I'm not a Freudian and we're not on a couch, but the framework might actually be useful here. Freud said you've basically got three systems running: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is pure impulse. It wants what it wants. It wants it now. No filter, no strategy, no long game. It's the part of you that reads a mean comment and then you immediately starts typing out of rage with all those responses in all caps at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Well, that explains a lot. Apparently, I have no division between my hemispheres or anything like that because I can hear my id, my ego, and my superego all at once, and I have to choose between them. But I understand that the id is the draft you write and then shouldn't send.
The id is the draft you write. Send, delete, screenshot it, maybe resend it, and then quote tweet for some good measure. What it doesn't do is it doesn't keep it simple. But what it does is it keep it scorch earth, burn the fields, poison the well, leave nothing standing.
Wow, if that's the id, what's the superego?
The superego is the opposite. It's your internalized rules, your sense of how you should behave. And in this context, the superego says, you should be above this. You should be a bigger man. You shouldn't care what people are thinking. Just ignore it, which sounds nice. It's also not realistic because you do care. You're human. You're pretending that you don't care is just a repression wearing a trench coat. You repress it up to a point where you start exploding at one point.
So if I understand all this voodoo mumbo jumbo, the superego says don't respond at all. And the id says respond with nuclear fire. And I got to tell you, neither one of those is related to keep it simple in any way.
Exactly. So keep it simple is the ego. And I mean that in a technical Freudian sense. Ego is a mediator. It's the realistic principle. It says, okay, the id wants to burn everything down. The ego wants to pretend we're a monk. So what we can actually do here is that how should we serve us in the real world, right? And the answer is say one true thing. Acknowledge reality. Don't suppress the fact that you've been attacked. That's super ego in denial. Don't unleash the full emotional payload either, because that's it hijacking your emotion. So find somewhere in the middle, state your position, and then exit cleanly.
That's actually perfect because the UNIX program is the ego.
Yes, the UNIX program is the ego. It doesn't pretend the input didn't happen because that would be the kind of program that ignores standard input, which is useless. It doesn't try to process every possible input either and then return a novel because that's a bloatware. That's it just vomiting into the screen. But it takes the input, does one thing well, returns a clean output, and then exits. That's ego. And that's the reality principle running on a terminal.
So when we say keep it simple, what we're really saying is don't let your id write the response and don't let your super ego convince you to write nothing. Let the part of you that actually understands the situation handle it. And that part knows that one clear sentence is worth more than a manifesto. And sometimes that sentence is insufficient data for further analysis.
But here's the kicker. You remember the negativity bias that we talked about earlier? The bad is stronger than good. So your id doesn't know about that. Your id thinks more words equals more defense. But the ego understands that more words equals more targets. The ego has read the research, read the memo, and the ego has seen the data. So it keeps it simple.
Yeah, the ego has a subscription to the actual journal and the id just has a Twitter account.
Well, I think that's going on our next t-shirt.
Maybe so.
So let's bring it back to what we talk about. Last time, we talked about imprecision that cancels itself out, the hopeful case. But this time, we're talking about imprecision that's aimed at you. And it turns out that the deck is stacked against you in ways you didn't even realize.
The algorithm amplifies the attack. Your own brain amplifies the attack. Thanks, evolution. And your id wants to respond with a flamethrower while your superego pretends you're above it all.
And the UNIX answer is don't match it. Don't try to resolve it with a bigger, more complicated answer. Let the ego do its job. Say one true thing, say it clearly, and then be done with it.
Yeah, that's minimum viable response, principle of least action, smallest possible cross-section. Where there's a clip from a movie I never actually saw that I saw on some reel somewhere. But it's Christopher Walken and some guy with a gun. And the guy points the rifle at him and says, "Put your hands up." And he says, "No." And the guy looks really confused. "Why not?" "I don't want to." "But I could shoot you." "I don't care." And they go through this for like 5 minutes. And eventually Walken, I think, just walks away because the guy's like, I don't know what to do with this guy. He just won't cooperate. He's giving the minimum viable response. Put your hands up. No.
That sounds like my conversation with my 2-year-old, which is much
Probably.
easier said than done.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything on this show is easier to say than to do. That's sort of the point. You figure out the right principle first, then you fail at applying it for a while. Then your Ed writes a 3 a.m. reply that you have to delete or say, oh, I didn't send that. Then you fail again. Then maybe one day you manage to write 2 sentences and actually close the laptop. And that's some progress.
And then you figure out the next principle.
And try to fail at that one more gracefully.
So let's meet again next week.
Tuesday after lunch.